Okay, so let's take a look at this constitutional overview. We've got a little overview of where we left off last. So the Constitution is going to create a federal system of government. We talked about all 7 of the amendments, and we'll just take a look back there real quick. Or sorry, the articles rather. The amendments will be the Bill of Rights that will be added in 1791. So we have our preamble and our 7 articles. Article 1, excuse me, gives the legislative branch its power, Congress. Article 2, the executive branch, President, his power. One day, her power, maybe. And then Article 3, the judiciary gets their power, the Supreme Court. Article 4, the relation among the states and the national government, which we call concurrent. Article 5, amending the Constitution. Article 6, national debt, the supremacy of the national law, oaths of office, and then Article 7, ratifying. So the Constitution also protects states' rights, and it provides a system of orderly change through amendments to the Constitution itself, which we just covered. A little bit about the compromises that the delegates put together. The Great Compromise balanced the large states, small states. Through the Great Compromise, large states got the House of Representatives, representatives based on population. Small states, the Senate, the upper house, all states, regardless of the population size, got how many senators per state? 2, very good. The very messed up compromise that placated or appeased the South was the 3/5 compromise that allowed for the 3/5 of the slave population to be counted as population for representatives.
So the South wanted slaves to be counted as one?
They wanted them to be counted as full representation, and the North did not want it. You have to keep in mind that by this time, a number of the northern states had started outlawing slavery in their own state constitutions. So they saw that as absolute farce, because you have a group of people that are not only owned, but they never have the opportunity to vote nor run for office, and they themselves are being counted for more of their potential owners to be elected. So it's like they could buy representation. Right, so the transatlantic slave trade will be outlawed by 1808, and then the issue of slavery altogether will be tabled up to 1816, 1818, and then we're going to see that all come about again through a thing called the Missouri Compromise. So again, that's why I look at, when I talk about the 3/5 compromise, it is a seed to the Civil War, because you can table it all you like, you can try to ignore it, but there are other forces that the Founding Fathers did not anticipate in 1787. We're only like 5 years away from the invention of the cotton gin, right? So they think slavery is on the decline, but the value and not need, but want and demand for slaves is going to increase. So it's sort of contradictory to what the Founding Fathers thought was going to happen. All right, and again, like Jefferson is an entangled web of contradiction that we'll talk about in Lesson 8 as we move forward. Remember that those who supported ratification believed that the 3 co-equal branches with all of their powers would prevent any one branch from having too much power with checks and balances, and it would limit the powers of the federal government, but do keep in mind that the federal government is going to be supreme to that of the states. So if we look at this concluded, we know that the ratification of the Constitution did not end the debate, and it creates the political party movement, and to this day, we're still working on how to create a more perfect union. So issues like economics, regional tension, social, ideological, religious, political, it all spawns out of this. So it's a little ironic when people are like, oh my gosh, we've never been so divided. Well, that's a little, that sort of like Chicken Little, the sky is falling type of mentality. We have to look at the historical perspective because we've always been divided. We were built to be divided. The Constitution developed party factions. And not everybody agreed that there should be party factions, but this document created that. It's just, for us now, it's a lot more polarized because we have so many different ways of getting information, right? Whether it be through social media or, television, internet, whatever. We have all that medium. Our founding fathers were doing the same thing. There was just a lot more, I wouldn't say a lot, just like relatively speaking, they have a lot of newspapers and articles and pamphlets and books in print to try to get their point of view across. They're participating in town halls, they're participating in debate, they're out on the stumps, speaking their minds. So you can run a lot of parallels to division then and division today, politically speaking. What does the Constitution do? It creates federalism, right? The powers of the federal government shared with that of the powers of the states, and the federal government being supreme. So some of the laws that the Constitution provides for the federal government: the broad power to tax, regulate commerce and trade from state to state and internationally, control of a common currency, the ability to raise an army, the ability to declare war. The state governments, they have powers to pass and enforce laws, regulate trade within their borders from county to county, town to town. They can regulate things like alcohol. They can regulate things like driving laws, right? They can establish local governments. They can establish schools. Like, for example, I am an employee where? In a county, but I'm also an employee where else? In a state, right? I have a state ID. I've got my retirement through the state. I've got, so I'm sort of like part of that local governmental story that was born out of this document and these constitutions. Both governments have the power to tax. Both governments have the power to build roads. Two of the key players in this game I want you to make note of. Washington, chairman, presides over the convention, rarely gets involved in the debates, tries to play referee. Sort of like Ben Franklin's role in the convention as well. He's the glue, Washington's the glue that kind of keeps this whole thing together. Madison, father of the Constitution, for a number of different reasons. Number one, he takes a copious amount of notes. He is taking notes on a daily basis. In fact, I encourage you, if you're into this era, I encourage you to check out Yale's Avalon Project. You can go in there and day by day, did I already talk to you guys about this, the Avalon Project? You can go in day by day and click on the transcribed debates and notes that James Madison kept of the convention. So that's pretty cool that we have that at our fingertips. He also is the co-author of the Virginia Plan with Edmund Randolph, and he's going to be the author of the Bill of Rights that will be written in 1789 and attached in 1791. He'll later become our 4th president. We'll talk about his presidency next lesson. Excuse me. Do we have any questions at this point? So there are some constitutional rivals in this particular convention. Those who insist upon the ratification, like Alexander Hamilton, and those who say, I will cut off my right arm rather than signing this document without a Bill of Rights, like George Mason. So this group becomes known as the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. The Federalists felt that they needed to get the word out to the populace that support needed to be provided for the Constitution. Do keep in mind this meeting was private, so people thought that the articles were being amended. They didn't know that an entire new government had been framed. The general public didn't really know that. So what they decided to do is to put together a group of essays known as the Federalist Papers. And in the Federalist Papers, under the pseudonym or pen name of Publius, Hamilton is going to write 51 of the 85 letters. John Jay writes 5 of them, and I think, what is Madison, like 25, something like that. So you have, most of these are published in the Independent Journal and the New York Packet, 2 newspapers that circulated in New York and beyond. So the idea here is ratification. Why should they be ratified? And these papers are written over a 6-month period. But do keep in mind, there are a group of anti-federalists that say a Bill of Rights is necessary, and to take away from states' rights would be tyranny. So that group is going to have their own set of papers that we're going to talk about today as well. Guys, what this is going to lead to is the creation of the political parties. The anti-federalists become the Democratic Republicans. The Federalists are just the flat-out Federalists. The Democratic Republicans evolve into the Democrats, and what's left over of the Federalists after the War of 1812 evolve into the Whigs. And then there's going to be all these other third-party movements. The anti-Freemason, the Know-Nothing Party, the Free Soil Party, the Liberty Party, the Constitutional Union, Northern Democrats, Southern Democrats. Eventually the Republican Party comes around. So like the Republican Party you know today has nothing to do with any of these people, with the exception of some Whigs are absorbed into the Republican Party, right? And I'll get into that, not some, a significant amount of Whigs are absorbed into the Republican Party, but I'll get into that as we move toward the end of the semester. So here we have Hamilton, Madison, and John Jay. So I got a little breakdown of these Federalist Papers, just some of the key papers that you might want to take note of. Federalist Paper 10, written by Madison to discuss preventing rule by majority faction and to advocate for large commercial republic, meaning international trade. Paper number 14, written by Madison, declaring the republic have a sort of a defense of the Constitution and the Federal Convention. Paper 39, Theory of Federalism, written by Madison. 51, Argue for Checks and Balances, written by Madison. Remember that theory of Montesquieu that we talked about before. Number 70, written by Hamilton, Calls for Executive Chief or President. Paper 78, written by Hamilton, laying out the groundwork of judicial review for the Supreme Court, what will become the Supreme Court in Article 3 of the Constitution. And then pretty famous one is paper number 84, and that is Hamilton and the Federalists claiming that a Bill of Rights would be redundant and not necessary. But that's the one thing that the anti-Federalists are holding on to. They believe that the Bill of Rights would be redundant. So here we have the Federalist Papers. Any questions on the Federalist Papers? So what is your Federalist position? Strong central government with shared powers of the state, but the national government is supreme. It's the dominant power. Checks and balances through the 3 co-equal branches of government. Regulation of interstate trade, regulation of foreign trade, control of national defense and foreign relations, and the ability to sign treaties. Believe that the territory is so large that political factions or parties would check and balance each other. But not everybody agreed with that in the Federalist camp. One guy in particular warned against political factions, and that was George Washington. Argued that a national Bill of Rights was redundant or repetitive, and then believed that the new nation needed to be built on a new economic model, new roads, new canals, industry, right? What's going on in England right now? The Industrial Revolution. And the Federalists want to see that Industrial Revolution make its way to America. Remember, these guys are they're well versed, they're highly educated, and they're connected with the rest of the world. They know what's going on. Finally, the Federalists support the assumption of state debts from the war, and they support the founding of a national banking system that looks similar to the centralized bank of England that had been formed in the late 1600s. Here are your key Federalists. James Madison on the left, George Washington there beside him, John Adams and Alexander Hamilton. What's really interesting and ironic is that there are going to be rivalries among this group. Madison will end up becoming a Democratic Republican. Washington did not want to claim himself Federalist or any other political party. There's deep division between Adams and Hamilton over a number of different issues. Foreign relations with France is going to be one key issue. And another thing, too, that these guys are going to grapple over, who do you support trade-wise? Do you support England or do you support France? Well, the Federalists tended to lean more toward England, and the anti-Federalist Democratic Republicans are going to lean more toward France. The anti-Federalist position, weak national government, strong states' rights. Most of these folks are Southerners or folks moving out toward the West. A lot of these folks also maintain support for the slave system in the South. They demand a Bill of Rights for the protection of individual rights, and their system or network of anti-Federalist papers are going to be written by Richard Henry Lee, same Lee family. Richard Henry Lee was Robert E. Lee's grandfather's brother. If that, you want to make some First Families of Virginia connections. Richard Henry Lee writes the anti-Federalist letters from a federal farmer to the Republic. They are against a national banking system, and they are for small business and agriculture. So we see a lot of these folks coming out of the South. They feel that the national bank is too English and could be too tyrannical. On the left, George Mason. In the center, Patrick Henry. And on the right, Richard Henry Lee, all Virginians and all leading anti-Federalists. So, clash between the anti-Federalists and the Federalists, obviously debates at the state levels and at the national level. They've got to take the Constitution to the people. So it's going to be debated in state conventions. The people were a little shocked. They were expecting revised articles. The Federalists are going to support, a larger, more strong national government. The anti-Federalists want the opposite. Most of your Federalists are from New England, the Middle Atlantic, and your city centers like Boston, Philadelphia, New York. New York is wholeheartedly the Federalist stronghold. Anti-Federalists believe the Constitution sort of was drawn up by an aristocratic element and was anti-democratic. Furthermore, the Anti-Federalists did not trust a document that Hamilton's going to push forward, and that's going to be the Report on Public Credit. It's kind of like a pamphlet. What this pamphlet does is it says, look, the state debts need to be assumed from the war, and it needs to be held by the national government, and there needs to be a national bank to genuinely have a democratic republic with a capitalistic economy. Virginia was not happy about this. Why? What had Virginia already done? Good job. They paid off the war debt, right? So this is going to create a secret sort of dinner between Hamilton, Jefferson, and Madison over how the states are going to relinquish their debt to the federal government. And that dinner results in the capital of the United States moving to Washington, D.C. So we'll talk about the dinner a bit later and the report on public credit. This is a book that I would recommend. Pulitzer Prize winner, Founding Brothers, written by Joseph J. Ellis. Pretty sweet book, and each chapter covers a different key event from this era. So I would highly recommend it. And then over there on the right is the report on public credit from the new Secretary of the Treasury, Alexander Hamilton. He will be Washington's Secretary of Treasury, first Secretary of the Treasury. So it goes to the states. The first state to ratify will be Delaware. 3 small states will follow. The first large state to ratify will be Pennsylvania. There's one major state hanging in the balance, and obviously you know what that state is, Virginia. If Virginia doesn't go, there's going to be a problem. Another state that's hanging in the balance, small geographically, but large in population and large in influence, that's Massachusetts. Massachusetts will narrowly go. Without Massachusetts, the other states may not have ratified. John Adams from England, minister to England at the time, helps tip the balance. John Hancock and Sam Adams were against it, against ratification. Virginia will ultimately ratify as the 10th state, and North Carolina and Rhode Island will follow. This is some anti-federalist propaganda on the left. Shows the falling of the federal pillars. On the right, this is Richard Henry Lee's Federal Farmer to the Republic. Letters from the Federal Farmer to the Republic. Excuse me. In the end, a bit of a conservative triumph. The Founding Fathers pull it together, the states ratify, and interestingly enough, what helps many of these state delegates push them over the edge is the promise of a Bill of Rights. Madison will be chosen to write the Bill of Rights. They'll be written in 1789, and they'll be added to the Constitution and ratified in 1791. That does not change the fact that the political party system is now being formed, and that's going to it's going to be an important story and theme for us moving through the rest of the course from here on out. Do you guys have any questions? Beautiful. All right, there's one thing that I would like to do